Hello YouTube, what is good? Today we will be retouching this image shot in the studio in a custom made scene for this shot specifically. So the goal was to have the lights coming in from the sides to a corner so that it takes the viewer's eye into the corner and you get drawn to the image, to the main focus, which is the model in this case. So let's roll that intro and let's just dive straight into retouching this one. First things first, the screen you see now at the moment is Capture One. So when I go to my settings, so let's go to my settings, you can see that I've changed a little bit. Let me reset the entire image. So let's reset, no, not copy, let's reset the entire image. There we go. So this is the original straight out of camera. So it's shot wide open at 2.8 with a Nikon D850 ISO 640 and a shutter speed of 1/160th of a sec. Zoomed in at 29mm. Why? Normally I tell people to shoot above 70mm, but because I wanted to create that nice tall image looking vibe, I decided to go with a wide angle, the 2470 in this case, and shot the model pretty close and zoomed out. So let me just undo the settings. So first things first, when we enable exposure warning, you can see that the highlights are blown out in the DL lights. So I'm gonna enable this. And then I'm just gonna drag the slider slightly to the left. I won't be able to get it in entirely, but let's see. Something around there should be fine. There we go. And then the shadows, I want to lift them up a bit. The same with the blacks, not too much. Reduce the contrast a little bit. Maybe play around a bit with the color. So I want to make it a little bit more colder, not too greeny, more to the purplish kind of side. So this for me looked at the image, looks nicely white balanced. So that's a nice starting point to get out. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna export this image through Photoshop. So I'm gonna export it as a PSD, 16 bits, color space Adobe RGB, resolution of 300 pixels per inch, 100%, and open it up with Photoshop 2021. So let's hit process. Here you can see the process, and then it will pop up Photoshop. There we go. Let me first reset my color space so that your workspace looks the same as mine. So I'm gonna go to a window, workspace, and then I'm gonna take photography. So when I take photography, this workspace should look the same as your workspace. What I'm gonna do first is crop in the image, make it so that it is right, and see what we end up with. So I'm gonna duplicate this image, take the crop tool on my left side, and then by holding down the shift key, it constrains the proportions of the crop. So I'm gonna be making sure that she's almost centered out, something like that. And I want to shift it a little bit that way because I want this line to be totally in the center. Let's hit enter. And that will be the base image we start retouching on. Now, the first step I always do is clean up the image. So that means taking away the pimples in the skin. I'm gonna be zooming in a bit. Not like 100%, this should be more than enough. And I'm gonna be taking the spot healing brush. This brush calculates for you what it should replace instead of the initial normal healing brush where you tell it which part it needs to sample. There we go. I'm just doing a rough edit from this, so I'm gonna remove all these little issues on the background because it's from a previous shoot and it's still the residue of some tape attached to it, but it's easier to remove it in post than repainting it to create that same vibe. There we go. Now, if you want to see perhaps a little bit more, there's a quick way for this. You can create a solar curve. This is a curve where all the points are dragged like crazy. As you can see, we're doing some crazy stuff. So just click on a point, drag it down, drag it to the limit. No, drag this one up again. There we go, drag this one down. And the more of these lines you have, the better you will be able to see details. Now here you can see there's a smudge. Here you can see there's a smudge. We got the line going on. So if we go back to layer 1 and we start healing it again, you can see that we can enhance it. Now keep in mind, this is for real heavy retouching, not for your normal Instagram post thingy. Like, this is used a lot when people are shooting cars to make sure that the reflections in the cars are perfectly cleaned up. But again, it's something personal. Like, I don't use it that often, but for this tutorial it's nice to show you guys what you can do with it. So I'm cleaning it up. This will be an issue we fix in the later process with frequency separation. So still cleaning all those tiny details up. The more time you spend in this stage, the better it will be as a final result. There we go. So let's disable this. There we go. So now we should have all the imperfections. We still see a little bit funky thing going on here, so I'm gonna clean this up. Clean this up. Now again, you could zoom into like 100% and do the entire image like this, but nobody would ever see it unless you're going for a big print, but otherwise they should be just fine. Now next up is skin. So I'm gonna be zooming in, removing these little dots, nothing too crazy. There we go. And the flyaway hairs, they don't matter that much to me. It's more like, yeah, it's a messy shot, so don't start cleaning those up. Nobody is gonna say, oh, you did a nice job cleaning up those flyaways. Just do the essential things, and then it should just be all good. There we go. So now I'm gonna run my frequency separation action, which is based on a median splitting. So I'm gonna hit Shift F6 on my keyboard. That's something that will not work at your keyboard. We got these actions available on my website, so feel free to head over there if you don't find them online. So let's go with 5-ish, because 10 is too much. And then we're gonna be painting with a mixer brush set to 20 20 20. The flow will be 10, and then we will be painting on the low layer. So I'm gonna zoom in and I'm gonna be starting to paint. The goal with this is to even out transitions. So like when I enable this one again, you can see that like painting over it, you're making blends so that everything blends out a bit more. Now I don't prefer to do it this way, but it is a way you can use it, because I still want to keep an eye on the skin itself to make sure that I'm using the right source to blend in. There we go. Now stretch marks, you can leave them, you can remove them. If you want to remove them, you can use this technique just on the high layer, which includes all the texture. Make sure that you take a clone stamp, set it to current layer. Make sure that it's set to 100 and change the hardness to 100%. So make sure that that's done. And then when you sample, you hold down Alt and you just drag over the part you want to fix. same on this part, just clean it up a bit. And then we move on to an upper side. So again, the mixer brush. Also make sure to zoom in and zoom out a lot. So don't start doing it like at this level. Make sure to zoom in and out. Now, if we're gonna do the face, that can be zoomed in a bit more because she's pretty far away. So I want to blend in the highlights a little bit more in the shadows. And another thing to consider is when you blend these, make sure to make circles when drawing it. So like go around, go around, go around. It blends the image, the colors a little bit better. So first you drag the color into that specific area and then you start mixing it up. There we go. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna take the clone stamp now and I'm gonna be cloning in some texture. So holding down Alt and just dragging over it to make sure that the texture is cleaned up in the skin. Now, same goes for here. I'm gonna take a mixer brush again and I'm gonna take a big brush and I'm gonna start like blending these in. There we go. Then when we zoom out, if we want, we can drag some of these brights into that part. And there we go, it's gone. So that's one of the first steps that I normally do when retouching these kind of images. Now, these are pretty hard lights, so the light that they reflect is not too soft. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, this is the first stage. The next stage would be dodging and burning. So I'm gonna hit create curves, drag this point up a bit, and call this dodge or lighten, whatever you want to call it. Duplicate this layer by hitting Ctrl J. Then dragging this point down, so we want to make the midtones darker, and I'm gonna call this burn. Now, the layer mask is still white. We want to change the white to black, so I'm gonna invert this layer mask by hitting Ctrl I. The same with the dodge, Ctrl I. And then we're gonna paint with a white brush if we want to make things darker, and with a white brush if we want to make things darker. So we got two layer masks, and if we want to see the effect, we have to paint with white on a black layer mask. Now, because this image is in color, let me first group them together. Let's call this DB. Drag them out of the frequency separation. Close this group. We need an extra layer to make sure that we have visual a confirmation from an image. So we can do this by hitting black and white and then retouching it in black and white. So in black and white we will see the imperfections a bit more, but we can play around with these sliders so that we know which parts we have to dodge or which parts we have to burn. So I'm gonna take a normal brush, set my flow to 1%, so really low, and then I'm gonna change my brush size depending the patch I want to darken or brighten. Like in here we can see that this patch has to be a little bit more brighter. So I'm gonna go into the dodge and I'm gonna slowly start building it up. Now, if you don't see any changes while doing that, make sure that you're painting with white instead of with black, because black works as an eraser in this case. So I'm just gonna slowly build things up. So if you see something that bugs you, like for instance this little line, reduce my brush size and just immerse so slightly, just paint over it. Keep in mind this might be a really long process. It takes as long as you want it to take, so let's make that pretty clear. If you go like, yeah, 1% is not enough, you can make the flow a little bit higher to like 3%, and then the build-up will be a little bit quicker. But keep in mind, you have to keep it in control, that you don't create other patches. Like now you can see I've created this white patch, so I would have to correct it with burn, going over it again. But we're not gonna be retouching it at that level. It's more like, yeah, contouring kind of thing. So I'm gonna burn this part a bit. I'm gonna burn the leg a bit. Make sure that when I dodge, in this case, I dodge the radiation from the light that's hitting her. I'm gonna emphasize a bit the muscles here. Emphasize the highlight. And let's just be clear, if you do this, you want to make sure that when you're doing this, that you take your time and don't start changing the model's face or anything, because you're contouring an image. So I'm gonna disable the black and white, and when I enable and disable, you can see that we changed some things. Let's see. So it's a matter of what you prefer to see. Now, I will be creating an extra dodge layer to emphasize the light sphere. So I'm gonna take this little hand icon, go onto the light sphere, drag it up, and then I'm gonna again invert the layer mask. I'm gonna rotate the image, and with a big brush, I will be painting over the light that's actually coming out of the TL lights. Emphasize a bit that light glare, flare, glare, whatever you want to call it, man. So before, after, nothing too crazy, but just like cleaning things up, making sure that everything is nice and evened out. And now you can go one step further and start really contouring the image. Now for this, what I do is I create a new layer. So I'm gonna click on this little icon, and I'm gonna fill this with gray. Or it's not even necessary to fill it with gray. If we got a new layer, I will call this contour. You can just change the blend mode here to soft light. And now when you start painting with black and white, black will make things darker and white will make things brighter. So when I go for the highlight, I just immerse so slightly, paint over it, enhance the little there we go. Enhance a little highlight in the hair, which was originally there. Enhance this little highlight. And then with a bigger brush, with black, flow of 1%, I'm gonna be contouring a little bit this part. So when I enable, disable, or enable, disable, you can see the difference. Now, you can do the entire image, but keep in mind it takes time. For me, I like to be in front of the computer as much as I like shooting. So for me, it's not really an issue. But again, if you are the person that likes to shoot more, forget about this step and just go shoot out. It's just something personal. For me, retouching is part of the creation, part of the process. There we go. But for me, this is perfectly fine. So this could be a final image. Now, if you went too far, you can always reduce the opacity of the layer. So I'm gonna reduce it a tiny bit to like 40-ish. 60 will be cool. Let's see. Yeah, 60 is cool. So the next step will be closing down dodging and burning and creating some colors. Now, colors is something personal. What I'm gonna be doing is playing around with curves in the blue channel. Let's see what we can come up with. Like if you want to go for a retro kind of vibe, an old vibe, vintage, this might be the curve you have to create. Now that's totally not what I want to go for. So let's drag these points out of it again. I want to make sure that the skin tones are pretty yellow orangey. So that's one thing I'm gonna be doing first. This is starting to look like it. I'm gonna create a new curve. Create a little bit more of contrast. But now for me it looks a little bit too greenish. So I have to fix that with introducing a little bit more magenta into the shots. There we go. Perhaps even dragging a little bit more magenta into the shadows. That's it. We're getting there, we're getting there. And now there's another adjustment layer which is pretty handful, and that is the selective color. So when I click on the selective color, you have everything split up into different colors. So for instance, if I want my reds to be more red, I drag them to the left. If I want them to be more cyan, I drag them to the right. Now in this case, I want them to be a little bit more red and a little bit more yellow and a little bit darker. This should be a nice ending point for me. Now, when we go to another selective color, I'm gonna do the same with the yellows. So do I want the yellows to be a little bit more less yellow, a little bit more darker, and I want them to be a little bit more magenta. So that's it. Now for the environment behind her, I want it to be a little bit more bluish. So to get at that stage, so if we enable the solar curve, this can go. The black and white help layer can go. So don't forget to save out when you're retouching. Save out as much as you can. Better to save one more time than to lose the image. And then to get the background toned the way we want to, we're gonna jump back into camera raw. So I'm gonna be merging everything together while keeping the layers beneath it. So I'm gonna do Ctrl-Shift-Alt-E. I'm gonna convert this to a smart filter. So I'm gonna go to convert for smart filters. Because if we convert it to a smart filter, we can always go back and adjust. If we don't do that and we confirm the adjustments we've done in camera raw, the problem might be that when we're not happy with it, there's no way back unless restarting again. So I'm gonna convert it for a smart layer. This takes a little bit of time since we're working with 46 megapixel files. Once it's done, there it is. You get this little icon on the image. You can go to filter, camera raw. Then it opens up camera raw. There we go. And in this panel, you can play around like crazy. So first things first, we're gonna be playing around with the color grading. Now the shadows, we want to be a little bit more blue. That's something we know for sure. The highlights, we want also to be a little bit more greenish, bluish. So you can already tell, like if I put them next to each other, you can tell that the vibe is shifting a bit more. The midtones, do we want the midtones to be another color? So here you can change the entire feel of the image. Again, this is personal for this image. I prefer to go that route. But now I want to adjust the separate color. So I want to adjust the skin tones a little bit more. So I will be playing around with the hues. So in this case, I can change the red more to pinkish or more to orange. Now, because we changed so much. Like orange is most of the time the color where skin tones are when we're talking about camera raw. I want it to be a little bit more orangey, yeah. And then the blues, do we want the blues to be more purplish or more cyan? Teal, I would prefer to go like more aqua. And then it's a matter of saturation. Do we want the skin tone to be less saturated, more saturated? I'm gonna pump up the saturation a tiny bit. The same in the yellows, and with the blues and the aquas. Aquas don't have that much of an effect. So if you want to know if you're in the right color, just drag it immediately to the extremes. The blues do have an effect, and I want the blues to be a little bit more blue. Now, luminance is how bright or how dark you want an image to be. So if we want the oranges, the skin tone to be pretty dark, we can drag it that way. Or pretty bright, we can do that. Now, I prefer where they are at the moment. The red, I might lift up a tiny bit, the same with the yellow. And let's see if we can get this a little bit more back to the green. There we go. So I am pretty happy with this result. Now, calibration is one of the parts that most people forget. Here you can like shift the image entirely. So if you want to go like more the typical teal and orange look, this is the way to go. Gonna drag saturation up a tiny bit. And don't forget to do things like gradually. So this is the original one. This is where we've ended up. I'm gonna go, I really like this vibe, so I'm gonna hit OK. And then this image is done for me. Now you can still play around with adding extra curves on top of it. So not like an extra curve. Go to the green channel and drag the greens, the shadows a tiny bit more to the right. There we go. So this way you introduce a little bit more magenta into the shadows. So on the left we always have shadows. On the right we always have the highlights. Now I'm gonna reduce the opacity of this layer to like 20-ish because I really like the blue-orange vibe in this. And that's it. So that's all I will be doing for this image. I hope you enjoyed it. If you got questions about this edit, feel free to let me know below. And yeah, that's it for now. And then I'll see you when I see you. Ciao, ciao.